It is 7 o'clock, so let's call this meeting to order. Beth, please call the roll.
Mr. Bodie?
Here.
Mrs. Gebhardt?
Here.
Mr. Gusset?
Here.
Mrs. Matney? Here. Ms. Wassman?
Present. Pledge allegiance. First on the agenda is minutes. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. Beth, can you please call the roll?
Mr. Bodie?
Aye.
Mrs. Gebhardt?
Aye.
Mr. Gusset?
Aye.
Mrs. Matney? Aye. Ms. Wassman?
Aye. Okay, under hearing of the public, it does not appear that there's anyone here to speak in front of us, so we will move on. Well, Dot's
Oh, that's right.
son graduated, last child
Yes.
graduated, so she said she was
Still
done.
miss her.
She
We still
retired
miss
from.
her.
Okay, so cell phone policy update.
So as all of you know, over the summer, the board passed a new policy giving the administration of Grandview Heights the decision to limit cell phone usage. And so the plan was authored that K-8 cell phones in essence would be often in the locker. And at the high school, they would be stored at the start of every period and end of every period. And so in an effort to be reflective, given that this was a new policy, we had set in motion this date and time to get an update from our principals on how that policy was going. And so what I also, full disclosure, Lisa Sullivan, I told did not need to come because in essence that was not a policy change, even though it was a policy change. And so our middle school principal, Sean Hinkle, and high school principal, Sam Belk, are here to give that update.
Yeah, so we actually sent out three surveys, one to staff, one to students, and one to families. The first one, from the staff perspective, and I will say that we had roughly about 70% of our staff who actually answered the survey, so I thought that was pretty good. But from the teacher's perspective, overwhelming support for it. I think that there's very few distractions as far as social media type problems. And I will say from an office perspective, we typically had one or two social media instances that came down to the office, which were extremely time consuming because they were kind of silly in nature and you never could really find the culprit and all those kinds of things. And please, everyone, knock on wood, because I do not want to jinx myself with this. But so far this school year, we've had one instance, and that was not in the building. It was actually at the first Friday night home football game. So other than that, we've had 0 social media instances.
So when you say that, I'm sorry, just clarification. You're talking about where basically somebody comes to you with a complaint about something that has
Correct.
been posted on social media.
Yep.
that they- Okay.
Yep.
Whether that happens in the school or elsewhere, like.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And you said 1 to 2 a day, 1 to 2 a
Week,
day.
1 to
Oh,
2
okay.
per week,
Okay,
yeah.
I-
And it's
Yep.
just been one period. since
One
the start.
period, yeah, again, yeah, please. And again, the teachers also report the fact that a lot more, students are much more engaged and actually interacting with one another, much more so than what they did. And they even pointed to lunch and other breaks where that is continuing to increase as well. Classroom benefits, again, increased focus, less social media drama. That was rampant everywhere. Fewer personal phone-related disruptions during class, whether that was students reaching out to other students, students reaching out to home. Oddly enough, yes, home reaching out to students during class time. All that has dissipated as a result, so that's fantastic. Staff also reports that students are going to staff members for help as opposed to texting mom or dad or whomever, which is a huge change. Some of the adjustments they talked about were maybe addressing YouTube as a distraction in class sometimes, but there are some teachers who use that, so that's just a classroom management piece that we'll continue to work on. And maybe some additional guidelines for headphones. I would be okay with that. Some students just simply forget that their smartwatches are on, and honestly, students will walk into a classroom and go, oh my goodness, I forgot that. I'm gonna run back to my locker and put it away. That hasn't been a big deal at all. But all in all, the staff is very, very pleased with how it's going, and they are in strong support of the continuation of this policy.
Sean, when you say headphones
Earbuds, whatever, yeah.
or like
Some,
devices?
no, a lot of students will either have some sort of music program on their Chromebook or on their phones or whatever and listen to the music through their earbuds. They're doing that through their Chromebooks right now. Most staff are kind of okay with that at different times. So in other words, like if it's an independent work time, they'll let them do that.
And if a student has their device in their locker appropriately,
Yep.
that would be, is that enough of a distance that the AirPods would still sync or the
I
headphones?
really don't know.
'Cause
Probably could be. I mean, I would say that I leave my phone in my kitchen and I'll be doing laundry listening to headphones, and that's pretty far away
I
in
can
my
get
house.
about to my, I can get about to my car before it starts getting waffly.
I was gonna say, like, our cars will pick up our phones inside the house, so it probably would pick up
And
on that.
not as an anything, just more of a nosy question,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm like, if they can listen to music on their device from their locker,
Mhm.
it's just something to,
It seems kind of moot though, because it sounds like they can use their Chromebooks anyway.
right.
Yeah, they can use their
Yeah,
Chromebooks
it
for
was
that.
my, I was just
And like I say,
nosy.
most staff's okay with that too, so.
Yeah.
Yep. Student perspective. This was a little interesting. The most interesting thing I found out about or looked at regarding this is there's only about 12% of our students who were sent the survey who actually responded. I thought we'd get a lot more.
But 12%, what is that, 100 kids?
Well, we only sent it out to the 7th and 8th graders
Oh,
because
okay.
they were historically the ones who used the phones the most.
Okay.
So we're looking at 198 students.
Well, but like 12% of that.
Yeah, 12% of that. So we had like 20-some kids actually
Okay.
respond. So,
Hey, your voice matters.
and, yeah, and we got mixed responses. Some thought, yeah, it's good. We're hanging out with our friends more than we ever did. Some responses were simply zero impact. It doesn't affect anything I do. I want my phone back. But, you know, all in all, so again, when we have mixed responses like that, it's such a small sample size, I don't know what the true, but again, from a student perspective, what I would say from my observations is, in the lunchroom, it's completely different. Kids are actually interacting with one another. They're getting up and moving from one table to another to go interact with another group. And we haven't seen that until we got rid of the phones, quite frankly. At lunch, some of you guys have come in before, at recess, I'm sorry, where we had a whole group of kids sitting right outside the doors on their phones, not paying any attention, and it's hard to get in and out of the building. That doesn't happen anymore. They're actually out playing, and even the 7th and 8th graders are out there playing basketball, playing kick, doing something physical, and interacting with their friends. So from my perspective, the students are actually interacting and talking and being with one another as opposed to being on that silly device all the time. So some of them have expressed some, now, whether this is what they think will get them back or whatever, or they actually truly feel this way, who knows? But some have voiced concern about, you know what, in actual emergency, I'd rather have my phone so I can get in touch with someone right now. It's probably not the first thing they're actually going to do in a real emergency, but we continue to talk with the students and with the staff about the fact that the office phone is available to you. There's a clinic phone in there. In other words, all the places that would have a potential emergency would take place, there's a phone there for you to contact your family. So we'll continue with that communication. From the family perspective, again, I was a little surprised at how little responses we had here. We sent this out to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade parents. So we're looking at 277 students. We only had about 60 responses. And so I don't know if that's 2 parents in a household, 1 parent in a household who's actually, who knows? So we're looking at anywhere from 10 to 20% roughly. So not a huge sample size again. I think family perspective is very positive. They do agree with the fact that it does increase their child's focus, and it does have reduced distractions. Some families also have relayed the comments that they wish they had more readily available contact with their student in the building because of emergency type situations. But again, I think we can mitigate that with continued communication about the fact that we have phones all over the building, whether it's the office, classrooms, clinic, wherever. We do have classroom phones, yeah. We don't want to use them for families calling in, but, I mean, if something were truly
Sure,
an emergency,
sure.
we could do that. Suggestions for improvement on their behalf was just simply talking about maybe allowing them some flexible access, in other words, during lunch and recess. I would hope not, because we've seen such improved interactions and behavior during those time periods. I would, my suggestion is to keep it a distraction-free time as far as those phones are involved. And again, I told you about the social media discipline results that we've had this school year, the observations at lunch and recess, the hallways. I know Andy asked a question earlier on regarding Chromebooks. In other words, with the absence of phones, have we seen an increase in the misuse of Chromebooks or something like that? Honestly, we have not. The other question that came about was, does this affect what we can or can't do within the classrooms? In other words, are we now using Chromebooks more because that's the piece of technology where maybe we were using phones as a piece of technology in the actual educational purposes? Honestly, that hasn't changed, and I'll give you one instance. I was up in the health room, 8th grade, and they were doing a public service announcement, so they were making videos. And our new health teacher, he was like, well, can they use their phones? And before I could even get out a yes or a no, the students started talking amongst themselves. And one student was like, well, I think we actually should use our Chromebooks, and then that way we don't have to mess with this new rule and this and that. And then one student after another came up with all of the positives as to why they should and how much easier it would be to video on the Chromebook as opposed to the phone. I literally just had to step back and let them work their way through it, and they said they gave their own answer before I even had to say a single word. So it hasn't had any negative impact on the classroom and our abilities to educate the kids.
Sean?
Yep.
I saw the note up there about uniform enforcement.
Yeah.
I just want to ask you about, like, have there been any enforcement issues and?
No, not too bad. I mean, as with anything, there's always some folks who, maybe take a little bit longer to get there than others. But across the board, it's actually been pretty good. We haven't, again, knock on wood, we haven't had too many instances where the kids. Now, I do think that, Mr. Wine and myself kind of laid the groundwork day one, meeting with each and every grade level students here in the Commons and going over the new rules and the whys behind it. The kids have been pretty good about it, actually. So we haven't had too many issues.
So one of the things that I recall as a core theme when we went to implement this new policy was, can you please allow eye watches? In particular, 7th and 8th grade parents. And so I'm curious, having done this now 4 months,
Feels right.
what are your thoughts on that?
On the watches?
Yeah.
In other words, should we continue that, or?
Should we
is that what
continue
you're asking?
as we're doing or make changes?
I think we should continue what we're doing. And reason being, it depends on the kids. But the watches, we had a lot of students texting and calling home on the watches just as much as they were with the phones. And I'll be honest with you, we had as many adults trying to contact their kids during actual class times on those watches. Now, we have made adjustments on, say, like, students who may need them that are actually, diabetes or anything like that. So that's in plans for those students. They have them. But for just, I would say to continue what we're doing. Yep.
Has there been any kind of, what is the office scene as far as like kids? What I'm curious is like, are more kids needing to come down there to say, I forgot my glasses, I forgot my lunch or whatever? Or perhaps are people starting to remember things better than they did before because they know they don't have a fallback?
Yeah, I don't, there hasn't really been much of a change.
Yeah.
To be honest with you. So probably at the end of the day, they're probably starting to remember things better now as a result. Because we haven't seen an onslaught of like, there's not a line out the office door to use the phone any more than usual, even
Right.
before this came about. So I don't think there's really been much change at all.
Okay.
Yep,
Thank you, Sean.
absolutely. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. So from the high school perspective, I think that the real work began in the 23-24 school year. As we kind of got into conversations as there might be something coming down the road, and this actually happened at the end of the 22-23 school year, the wheels started turning a little bit. And so I think, as Sean kind of mentioned, discovering that why as to if we were even to do anything regardless of legislation, why would we do it? And so those conversations started very early last year, and they started with staff first and meeting with, during staff meetings or different departments. And then they quickly became student conversations. So there's a group that I regularly meet with, but also I encourage staff members to start talking about it in their classrooms and things like that. Like, if this were to happen, what would this look like at the high school? And why would we do this at the high school? And so those conversations started off very positive, of course, for the staff. They were just like, I think this is a great idea, the well-being for our students, and that really was the central focus. The thing that I kept saying to students over and over and over is I always use the term fun police, and we are not the fun police. We are not the cell phone police. We are looking to do something to change for the better. For the academic settings in the high school. And what will that look like at the high school? It's not going to be universal to what everyone else is thinking, K through 12. And so those discussions started, and they started off, they weren't resistant in the groups that I met with students, but they said, we're fine, we're good. We like it how it is. It should be classroom to classroom how it is. And we can kind of take care of ourselves. We're high schoolers. And then we kind of got past that, and the discussion changed from like this would be good for our well-being, because we really analyzed the amount of time we all spend on our phones, and how that there's no way that can be productive when you're trying to learn curriculum. And so then the conversation shifted from, well, you're not taking something away from us, but then what would this look like at the high school, and when would this be best served? And so that is what was implemented, as Andy said, at the beginning of this school year. And equally as important to that, and Sean mentioned it too, is I always like to meet with each individual class the first week of school, but this was I made it maybe a bigger deal than it's turned out to be, but I was like, this is a big change. I met with staff before the students came in and said, let's all come in together in the auditorium as a student body and a staff and just kind of talk about, the way this is going to look and the expectations from room to room. And as Andy said, the high school is a little different. In academic areas, the phones are put away. They're put in cell phone caddies, and students still can have access to their phones during study hall and during lunchtime. And so that's kind of what it looks like. And kind of getting that perspective as the year has progressed, I had a lot of stop points in place already to kind of do more temperature checks than I've be honest with you, than I've done, because they haven't been necessary. So I started off kind of, talking with students and talking with staff pretty regularly, pretty weekly, every week, kind of seeing how things were going. And then really the input didn't change much. And so that's kind of where the information that I'll talk about today. From the staff's perspective, the thing you'll hear overwhelmingly is a positive feedback. What they're seeing in the classrooms and when I'm in classrooms and walking through the hallways and seeing things is just an increased engagement. And the thing that I keep hearing from our staff is the amount of things that they can get to in a regular class period or a block class period now, because those transition times are just so much smoother. And so what they're finding is their kids are engaged more through conversation, through the curriculum, and just generally what's going on in the classroom. So that's an overall theme. As I said, the class time, and we don't have a lot of issues at the high school when it comes to power struggles and things like that. Phones were one of them sometimes, and a rarity, but sometimes there might be something going on where a kid is communicating with someone else and the teacher does not know what they're communicating about, and they say you need to put your phone away, and that turns into a struggle. This 100% eliminates that. Sean mentioned discipline issues or problems with cell phone use and things like that. Again, we have great kids and we have great teachers. We don't have a lot of those issues, but there were some, and there are way, way less. I have so many more less conversations, Matt as well, with students about inappropriate use or pictures or anything like that during class time and things like that. Adjustment, this is why I set all those meetings at the very beginning of the year, was because I anticipated like this huge culture change in the building, and there really wasn't. I think us kind of having that uniform expectation and then communicating that well with students, it just kind of flowed naturally. Our students took ownership, our teachers took ownership, and the expectation was set from classroom to classroom. But again, at the high school level, whenever there was a conversation of we're taking cell phones away, and not really. Like, if you think about a regular class period, we have 43-minute class periods, hour and a half on block days. So, like, if you really got to do something as a high schooler, contact work or do whatever, you still have time throughout the day. So it's just those blocks of time when we're in those academic settings. One of the suggestions for improvement is kind of what Sean said as well, was the AirPods. And, you know, give us some more guidance and some more information as to what we should do about those. And my response to that has been very, very black and white. It's like, what would you have done before this? What would we have done when you notice a student has AirPods in your classroom before? The first thing it always starts is with the conversation. You know, like, maybe not in front of students or anything like that, but like, I noticed you've been listening to AirPods. Have that conversation, build that relationship, and 99% of the time, they're gonna listen and not listen to music in the classroom. So that was the number one concern that we've had so far is coming into it was, what if they still wanna listen to music and things like that? And that is a perk of something on your Chromebook or something like that. If teachers have that time in their classroom and students have their phones put away, that they can listen to something from their Chromebook, but they're being very responsible with it. From student perspective, I kind of already touched on this a little bit, but unlike Sean, we had 100% participation. No, I'm just kidding. We did have a little bit more, but again, the perspective really comes from having those conversations and from observations with students, and they'll keep it real with you with their feedback. From the survey results, though, the word very effective was one of the options, and that was the overwhelming thing, with 23% of our students responding. And that it creates an environment for more interaction. Same thing the teachers were saying. And then some said that there was very little change. And I've had conversations with students where they blatantly said, I could control my cell phone usage before. This didn't change a thing. So focus and engagement, the phrase out of sight, out of mind has came up. I don't know if they kind of talked about it before they took the survey or something like that, but that came up a couple times, and coming to free responses was, it does help when it is out of sight, it is completely out of mind. And I know I've spoke to some of the people on the board too that have similar situations that they've seen in the classroom, and they've kind of heard that feedback from students as well. The major concern really has nothing to do with the cell phone restriction. It's kind of a whole other thing, but this kept popping up on the survey, so I put it on here to reflect it, was Wi-Fi restrictions. And that's just, there's a reason why certain things are blocked over school Wi-Fi. And so those are just individual conversations with students. If you need to access something for school, we'll make sure that you can access it on an appropriate avenue. Suggestions and improvement was continue to allow access during non-academic times. That was a huge response from students, especially in conversations. That is something that I said we will always look at and always reflect upon in the high school. Will we ever mimic exactly what the middle school is doing? I don't know. As of right now, I know that it's extremely effective what we're doing at the high school. And again, we just finished the first quarter, so, or a little bit ago. So we're still kind of in the evaluation phase. Family perspective, I've had a lot of great conversations as well, just in meetings and things like that. But some of the perspective that we got back from parents is very effective as well. And they're noticing more focused conversations with their students, with their kids, when it comes to actually the academic things that they're doing in the classroom. There's much more of an in-depth response to what they're doing. Report that their children are more engaged in seeing improved grades and reduced anxiety. I think that does go hand in hand with those interactions that we see sometimes that turn into discipline issues. Parents are seeing that as well. I know, I'm not oblivious to the fact that certain things do still happen on social media, and we are just not seeing as much of it, and we're not getting reports from parents as much as to this is happening on the weekend or and things like that. There is a huge support and appreciation from every conversation I've had with families so far. Really, any concerns that we've had have been just enforcement from classroom to classroom, and I really don't like the word enforcement, but that is what pops up. And really, we do have a very uniform policy in place to where teachers are setting that standard from classroom to classroom. Any instance where there's been a differentiation from that, I've been able to have a conversation with the teacher, and they've kind of explained, oh, we were doing this. If it's for an academic purpose and they were outside taking photos or something, absolutely. And so those have been able to be handled, quite quickly. The board got a shout out in a few things too, and some of the conclusion summaries was that just appreciation for supporting this policy and kind of getting the gears in motion. So that was all I had.
I'm just curious about the Wi-Fi piece. Can you give any examples of like what are restricted sites that people feel inconvenienced by not being able to access?
And those are once you dig down, it is never an academic purpose that they couldn't get to. It's always been, and this is just the few examples, it's been something probably that they shouldn't be trying to access at school. I mean, just to be honest with you.
High schoolers?
That's what it's been. And so, our tech team is amazing. Like, if we get a report that, like, hey, we have a certain group of students that we think or we heard them talking about getting into this, like, I can ask Chris and his team, like, to kind of do a little bit of research and say, like, are kids trying to access X, Y, and Z? And, well, first of all, they can't say them, but they are looking at, this other thing. But there's never been an instance where a student has been able to give me a concrete academic purpose that they can't access something. So.
Makes sense.
Was there along the lines of things that are blocked? Because I know in my classroom, on my Chromebook, I can't get to things that I can get on my desktop as a teacher.
Oh, on your personal device, like on
No,
your,
school Chromebook.
gotcha.
Desktop, whatever. Is there consideration, something to think about possibly along the lines of blocking things with Wi-Fi, blocking social media?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean,
I
certain
don't know if it's open or not.
certain aspects are not even open. I mean, like,
So like,
just.
can kids get to Instagram, Facebook?
I
That's
don't-
what I'm
I
saying.
don't- Not, neither of those, no.
So those were locked down ahead before.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Those weren't part of the cell phone policy, yeah.
And
And so,
that's-
I mean, again,
I got you.
students can always go to LTE on their phone.
Yeah.
say that.
VPN.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there's ways around it, but
Yeah.
there's also, are we trying our best to be at least a little bit inconvenient as the fun police? And I did not realize that.
Sorry about
growing
that,
up.
yeah, but yeah. No,
That's me.
definitely,
fine.
definitely, yeah, they're,
Happened to think, I was like, if they can't get to my personal favorite, Snapchat, it's
Yes.
a lot of problems in life.
Yes.
Could they block an app
an app on a phone?
on a Wi-Fi, like it just doesn't work?
Yeah, I mean, like,
And it's on Wi-Fi. but then if
anything
they-
on Wi-Fi that,
Right,
that
and if they're, yeah, I
these
gotcha.
guys restrict behind the scenes, you cannot get to, And so that's where the frustration, and again, it's not about just like trying to
Yeah.
lock out all the fun of having electronics, but
No, but there's things where it's like, and I might with you on this, is the fun police, cause it's like, ultimately, we're here in an academic setting to learn. So, I mean, but it's also, it's toothpaste that's been out of the tube, you can't really put it back.
exactly.
So, here we are doing the best, and you want kids to be responsible, you want the whole 9 yards.
Yep.
You know, I get, it's just questions, and
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm supporting it, I'm just nosiness a little
Yeah,
bit.
I love it. I love
Well,
it.
and high school kids more, as they're getting older, obviously, they're learning to make decisions for themselves. Middle school, maybe not quite there yet, but I am torn about this idea of like going study halls and stuff too,
Yeah.
because it's like, can you put it back in, like, put it back in the bag now? But, you know, I see it in my own household, the inability to just be still and engage, like, and deal with entertaining yourself without a screen in front of your face. I mean, and there is certainly value in that, and there's lots of studies showing that it's not a good idea to have your mind turned on in that way all the
All
time.
the time,
And
yeah.
what kind of innovation or creativity are you restricting by having it? So there is a part of me that sees like things like study halls and free times and thinks, maybe it's not a great idea. And I'll say the same thing for the middle school, YouTube. Like I don't love that during free time that they have the ability to use YouTube, because I know in my household, our rules are that it's heavily restricted. You can only have so many minutes a day. But then I know that at school, YouTube's on a Chromebook, and if they have downtime, there are teachers who say that's allowable, even though it's not allowable in my household. So, you know, it's tough, but I don't know where to go with that, but.
Well, what conversations are happening around the self-discipline around their phone? Because I struggle with the same thing you do. I don't want to be telling my child as a freshman in college that I have to turn off their phone. You know what I mean? Like needs to be a point where they recognize when they need to focus on this. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
seems like a life skill. So are those conversations happening?
Totally. And I think that's kind of what I did a poor job of explaining the year before, was like coming to that understanding of why this is important, and then having those conversations, just not only with our student services, but those conversations inside the classroom as to why we would do something like this. And to your point, like the reason I think at the high school, at least for this first part, that there has been such a buy-in from the students was because the opinions were taken in consideration, and the option was still out there though. Like we're going to evaluate and continue to evaluate. That might be something that happens down the road, but right now it's really going great within the classrooms and things like that. But why can't we have those conversations as to why that would be important to not have your brains turned on during all your free times too? And again, it's not me standing up here saying this is what we're going to do, but like
Right.
those conversations can always happen now.
Right,
Now that we've
yeah.
had some success.
Rather than it being a straightforward rule, it's a conversation about, you know, pros and cons of
Yep. Yeah.
our actions.
Totally.
And there's two where the school at some point is not the parent's child. It's not the child's parents, like, you know.
Right, yeah,
My child
that's
doesn't
true.
have social media, but I know he screws around on YouTube, and I'm like, you're splitting hairs, Molly, but I'm very comfortable
Yeah.
splitting those hairs. I do think, especially in the middle school, if the cell phones are not allowed, they're not allowed. Opening it up during lunch in study hall or star, slippery slope too, then if it's in my hand for lunch, then it's in my pocket, and it's hoodie
Yeah.
season, so they're all right there.
Yep.
And to me, as a policy standpoint, I don't know why we would change it. Because if it's not allowed during the day, it's not allowed during the day. High school, I think, is a little bit trickier. If it is allowed, you know, it's a different policy than it is in the middle school.
Yeah.
And that, to me, like, I can sit and look at my high schoolers in study hall, and they're doing their TikTok dances, they're screwing around, they're also doing work, and it's like, at some point, to both of your points, they chose to do study hall or they chose not to. And it's not like, you know, so that's where I'm like, the middle school, I don't know why you would change it. High school, I'm like,
Well, for lunch, I mean, they have
Yeah.
open lunch, so there's not a
Yeah.
whole lot, like, you know, it's,
Yeah. So it's really just that one.
yeah.
I mean, they're in their car, if you're on
Right,
Snapchat, it's fine.
You
whatever.
walk home.
But that's, to me, I'm like, And I suppose that would be on the study hall person's discretion, whether they allow them, and you could make an argument both ways.
Yeah.
At the high school level.
Yeah.
You, I'm like, I might argue with you on that
No.
one, I'm like,
Yeah, I feel like middle school's
go
different.
outside and hurt yourself playing
Do
go
something,
ball.
yeah.
Much prefer, much preferred to a cell phone in your hand.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
thank you
you.
all
Great
very much.
feedback. Really great feedback.
This is like extending beyond the cell phone policy, but, so, it's not necessarily, I'm not expecting anyone to answer questions right now, but regarding Chromebook usage in classrooms, and maybe this would be something, Angie's not here either to talk about this, but I would be curious to hear a little bit sometime about, research on Chromebook usage as an instructional tool. There are different ways kids learn, and there's, some different thought about whether or not that's an effective way to instruct kids through a Chromebook. And it can be, because when you want to differentiate learning, I see, kids have different access, it's a good way for that, but sometimes I'm a little concerned about the reliance on Chromebooks. It is not the same across the board, it kind of depends on the class. But just about whether there's any study or research that could be pointed to say, are we going down the right path? Here we are like a decade into this way of learning, and even more so post-pandemic. Is it the right track to be on?
I think
Great question.
it's a good question. It's also, what does it look like in the classroom? And I think that would vary, and it might be something, survey teachers, how much do you use the Chromebooks? Because for, like, I can tell you my own personal journey, like, I would have students write them, and we're paper and pencil, because my friend Google Translate right there. So how much is it perceived being used versus
Right.
actual use?
Yeah, and I know it's very different for each classroom. I hear my kids even say, some teachers will say, open up your Chromebook. These are our notes, we're gonna go through it together through the Chromebook. Some simply use it for,
Yeah.
their
I would,
exams and whatnot, but it just depends. But I just, I know every kid learns differently, and also I worry about eye strain, frankly, too. But,
So I think that big picture and stated succinctly, because we could have this, is a great question, and I think we could talk about this for a long time. That a Chromebook is a tool, and it can help maximize and personalize learning, and it can help be an effective way to provide feedback, and watch a video or create a video or et cetera, et cetera. I think the teacher's judgment such that sometimes a paper and a pencil is the best way also to assess learning. Molly kind of referenced it. And so their judgment and determination, and what we don't want is an over-reliance on it. My humble opinion, 27 years in public education. Chris and Jess Fields on this topic could give a really incredible, thought-provoking, maybe not all the answers, but asking the right questions
Right.
with some research, board presentation on this topic.
yeah, I just think it'd be interesting. I'm just curious about, because sometimes you start down a path and then don't stop to
Yeah.
reevaluate whether it was the best one to be taking, so. And I'm not saying like I have problems, I just,
Yeah.
it's open-ended. I
Yeah,
don't
right,
have a
right.
preconceived notion of what the end, what the answer is. It's-
Well, and interestingly, I haven't had a chance to communicate this to you all, but it will be in my next Monday board update. I've asked Chris to give a short AI update to the board, because he did that to our leadership team. And, I feel like I'm generally up to speed on AI and its applications, et cetera. I'm more informed than maybe the average Joe person. But what Chris shared was, I think, worth you all seeing. And so, and what made me think of that was, what's the Chromebook's role in accessing and using AI as a tool? Well, pretty significant. Great
Thank you,
question.
Phil.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, excellent job.
You're free to stay for the rest of the meeting.
We're going.
Don't leave leave her by herself. Don't do that.
See you.
Thank you.
Okay. Are we ready to move on to the superintendent's report?
Yes. So I've handed out copies, and all of the audience members, if you haven't got it, you can grab it at the back table. I just want to highlight a couple points. One, at Larson Middle School, a new group of peer leaders in 7th and 8th grade students met with a coach from Sources of Strength for a day-long training. And so that's part of, I just think that's a really great thing. We also had an opportunity for high school students to meet with Jonathan Moody, architect and CEO of Moody Nolan, the largest black-owned architectural firm in the country. So our BARC group sponsored that, and I think that's a wonderful thing. Our Chief Academic Officer, Angie Olam, and Jess Fields, instructional coach, and Career and Workforce Coordinator, Devin Albiot, attended the Pathways of Prosperity Conference to learn about and consider best practices in career exploration, experience building nationwide. And I just wanted to say, I think that with the hire of Devin and even Stephanie, our new high school counselor, career pathways and workforce has certainly being communicated a lot more. I think importantly, the athletic department is also hosting professional development training for all middle and high school coaches. Ohio State's Life Sports program will be conducting their own Coaches and Beyond program.
College of Social Work.
Yes, it is, from the Ohio State University, under Eric Bodie's leadership. And really, I'm sure everybody in our community is going to be overly excited about attending this Friday Superintendent's Coffee at 8:30 a.m. just outside our central office. That's this Friday, 8:30 a.m.
Great. Any questions?
Thank you, Andy.
All right. Beth, you're up with your presentation.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start with some highlights as of the end of October. So our revenue is right on track where we expect it to be. Our taxes, our homestead rollback, our Grandview yard, all hovering around that 50% mark with one of the tax settlements. State funding we're about a third of the way through the year. That's monthly, and our numbers are right on track there. Interest revenue for the month, $83,531, and our fiscal year to date, a little over $324,000. So, continuing to maximize that as much as possible. Expenditures were about 0.5% under budget for this point in the year, so that's good news. And our investments, we are seeing Star Ohio, it's under 5% now. I think it's in the 4.8 range as of today. The end of the month, it was 5.01. So we are seeing that starting to go down a little bit as expected. Our U.S. Bank investment account, 3.27%, and continuing to work with Meter Investments on, keeping enough in liquid account, but investing it to maximize interest earnings in our investment account as well. So the Permanent Improvement Fund, not really a whole lot new here. Our unencumbered balance is just over $130,000. We will have another, of course, tax settlement, probably February timeframe for the other half of our tax revenue in the PI fund. And our current projects are just the two that have been ongoing. So the track project is done, of course. I think we're still holding the retainage on that until the final punch list is completely done. And then the interior design work is ongoing. So just wanted to switch gears here and give a quick update on our bond millage setting process. So this is just kind of a refresher that I share this time of year, November each year. So our bond millage from our 2018 levy, bond levies are a little bit different than any other levies. They are set to generate a dollar amount that is needed to make debt payments, and so regardless of the millage rate. There's a process, we've talked about this, that to certify to the county auditor, the funds that we have on hand and any other sources of funds that we have that are gonna help make our debt payment next year. Typically, for a school district, there are not other sources. Typically, with the bond issue, the tax revenue is what makes the payments. So we are a little bit unique there. So the county auditor will calculate the necessary millage following that certification process, and then that millage is sent to us to get our approval on, to make sure that we agree with that, and then goes into effect the following calendar year. So just a quick update on where we stand with that process for this year. So to kind of recap, our 2018 levy was about 7.5 mils. It was about 5.8 increase from what was existing. And with the resolution the board passed just before the 2018 election, the additional Grandview Yard funds that we were able to negotiate, that bond or that board resolution earmarked those funds to be put towards paying the bond principal and interest. And so, of course, the actual increase ended up being only about 2.8 instead of about 5.8 because of those additional funds that were earmarked. So at the time, the board, Andy and I committed to a transparent presentation to share with the public each year. We got a lot of questions at that time about, how does this process work, and how do we know that money is being put towards that bond levy. And so this is what we share each year. So the certification I actually just sent in yesterday to the county auditor, and on that certification I reported $1,058,000 of our Grandview Yard funds will be used to help pay 2025 principal and interest. That amount comes from a kind of a structured plan that Baker Tilly helped us put together back in 2018 and even prior. And so that number is not something that I just come up with. It follows the plan of the entire bond issue. And so a little over $1 million will be put towards that. Sent that again to the county auditor yesterday. And then before the December meeting, we should have the actual rate to share. And so this slide is what that certification form looks like. So it's essentially what our current cash balance is as of the end of December. And then if you look up about the fourth number from the top, there's a line that says, other sources of cash, and that second line says Grandview Yard TIF money earmarked for debt service. And so I have added in that $1,058,000. And so that adds to that debt service fund balance, the funds that we have on hand that are gonna be put towards that. And so when the county auditor looks at our debt payments that are due next year, and they look at this 2.4 million that we have on hand and coming from Grandview Yard, then they set the rate is gonna be considerably lower than it would be without these funds. So anyway, that's what that process looks like. That's what that form looks like that I submitted yesterday. And once the county auditor does the updates for 2025, we'll get the tax rate back. And again, I'll share that with all of you next month. So that's it. Oh, sorry, one more slide. This is something that I've shared since we have done that as well, just to kind of track. The red was that old bond levy from the 1990s, phasing out while our new one kind of phased in. And what you see in terms of those reductions in the 2018 in the yellow bars is because of, as values have continued to go up, that rate goes down. So it's not that we're collecting less, we're collecting the same amount that we originally intended to collect. But as values have gone up a few times with reappraisals and such, that rate goes down. So 3.25 is this year's rate, and it will likely be pretty close to that for next year. So that is all I have.
Any questions? Okay. Is there a finance committee report?
Well, we spent our committee time, I think, looking at sort of the approach to the bond sale. And say I was a bit of a contrarian with some of it.
Shocking. I was quiet.
But looking at options, and I thought, and we got some options, we were looking at them, that got to, timing. So there's sort of the tax bond anticipation notes that initially are sold, and then, which gives some money on hand to do things like the architect's contract and things like that. And then you later sell bonds and pay off what you had, the anticipation note. So the timing of when that happens. And kind of the standard approach, I would say, which is sort of, the experts just sort of jump in and say, this is, this is the path, is to do all that kind of as soon and as big as possible, with the goal of maximizing the amount of revenue of interest earnings that you have. So do all that right away. And we had asked them to look at some other scenarios where some of that was delayed, where you didn't have to issue as much right away, so you wouldn't have as much interest payments right away. So, there'd be some benefits to the taxpayers, and then later, but then you also would have less interest earnings. And we kind of looked at the pros and cons of that, and I know, Emily, you and I talked a little bit after that. I guess, the path of kind of the standard approach has some real positives to it. I mean, one positive that I think Beth pointed out, which I think was important, was, messaging, and we told people this is what's gonna happen. And so, if we say it's gonna be a 6.95, millage, and then it's not, even if it's good news, first year it's something less than that, but then the second year it has to get up higher, then that's like, well, what are you doing? That's harder to explain. And there is an approach, which is, if you earn the interest earnings, you don't have to use them. So, that what you use can be used later if, we do the project and have a successful project and keep it on or under budget, and you have money left over, that can be used to effectively decrease what's collected later on. And that's a little, a less risky approach, because, you have it if you need it, but if you don't, then you can give it back, essentially. So, at least in my mind, that's, the approach that to be taken at this point, which is, I think, embedded in the documents that we have. I guess my own personal, strong belief in there would be that I really do want us to do what we said we were gonna do. And, we have a square footage, we have a level of kind of finishes and quality, and to do that within the budget. And I really, really don't want to give a message to, our professionals that, oh, it looks, we're gonna earn $3 million extra, so, build that in and, add $3 million more of stuff because we have it. I would personally not wanna go down that path. And I think there are some management tools that we can do with our professionals, like with contingency allowance and things like that, to sort of help them manage us and manage themselves with that. So anyway, I think from the committee, we talked about that, we looked at some options, we got some good. I think one thing that I helped to understand was how, we didn't have much time to think about this. We have to pass some resolution today and to do something different. I thought there would be a little more time to go through it. So anyway, so we have the resolution today to approve the anticipation notes and the bond sale. I do think they're written in a way that allows some flexibility, sort of the maximums, and so there's still timing and that kind of consideration. But I think, again, that's fairly standard.
So we work with Bricker Graydon, the bond counsel, same bond counsel we used in the 2018 bond levy, and then as well as Baker Tilly, who we've worked with for, since before the 2018 levy too. So those are the kind of the team of experts that kind of ran the numbers and the scenarios that Eric talked about, and kind of outlined the pros and cons of each. And so, Eric explained that really well, but, there are pros and cons of doing each, and I think we landed on what is the pretty typical approach. It results in less overall debt payments over the life of the bond issue, more interest earnings, and also with this approach, part of the bond issue will be exempt from something called arbitrage rebate, which means because we're tax exempt, if we invest those tax exempt proceeds and earn more interest than the interest rate that we're paying on those bonds, then the law is that you have to rebate that back to the IRS. And so by doing the financing arrangement that we landed on, 15 million of our total bond issue is exempt from that. And that's part of the push to get that bond anticipation note issued before the end of this calendar year, because that limit is per calendar year. And so that's another kind of pro of doing the bond anticipation note sooner. And we do need to have funds on hand to be able to certify the contracts for the architect, the construction manager, the owner's rep, when we get them on board and sign those contracts, so.
Questions?
So anyway, thank you guys for your
Looks like I got
time
billions, but we're good.
Do you have anything to add, Molly?
No, this is what I did in the committee. I went, I didn't even know the questions I wanted to ask. No, it's all interesting and fascinating, and I'm very happy to have Mr. Bodie and Ms. Collier at the helm, because they know like they're talking to each other, and I'm like, I didn't even know that was an option to ask. So, you all are great. I just hung out during the meeting.
But thank you, Emily, for your time and input on that as well.
Yeah, I ended up meeting with Bricker Graydon and Baker Tilly, also with Eric, to understand what was going on. So anyway, it's a lot, and it had, like Eric said, it had to be done quickly, because we didn't have an option, but it had to be passed at this meeting by law. So I was
No, I
under the gun on that one.
put a lot of faith in these two, and I didn't know that, but I'm like,
Okay, well then we can move on to under business and finance, the recommendations for approval, C1 through, funny enough, I actually looked before this, thinking and then it left my mind, 1 through 14, which does include everything we just talked about. There's the bond anticipation notes, there's the bond issuance, so there's some big stuff there. A lot of technicalities, but very, very exciting also. So moved to get the balls rolling. Is there a second?
come on,
Second.
Bodie.
Any further discussion on this?
You know, one thing, just maybe for Andy and Beth, and I think it'd be good for the whole board to hear, is I haven't, I at least personally haven't gotten, in depth on the timing of this, but, part of this is the approval to go ahead with the process for the construction manager and the design professional. So just sort of what do you have in mind for the coming time period of what that will look like?
So, there's 3 RFPs. One is for owner's rep, one is for construction manager at risk, and a third is for an architectural firm or design team. And the sequencing will be to post interviews, hire an owner's rep first, second, architectural firm, third, CMR. I would guess that we're looking at somewhere between, I would guess, hopefully, our plan is before winter. Actually, Beth and I have a meeting tomorrow, she and I, scheduled to really put dates on calendars, and before winter break, be able to have hired the owner's rep and the architectural firm. And by end of January, early February, March-ish hire the CMR?
And the time frame, so Andy and I met with the construction team at Bricker Graydon. We actually had 2 meetings with them so far, the most recent last Thursday, to go over in great detail the timeframes for each. And the architect and the CMR, RFQ, RFP process are outlined in Ohio law, and there's a certain amount of time. So tomorrow, I will be posting the notice. I'll be sending that to the Columbus Dispatch, to some other, parties that kind of advertise that in that construction world. And there's a certain amount of time that each one of them has to be kind of open to accept the proposals. And then there's with the owner's rep, there is not a statutory requirement to do that. We are doing that process to open it up, but there is not a statutory requirement for that. The construction manager has a little bit longer period that the notice has to be open to accept RFQs. And so we're really following the kind of a timeline. And I'll share that, I'll send that via email tomorrow, share with you guys kind of what that time frame looks like. But we'll be posting those notices tomorrow and going from there. So there will be, we kind of laid out roughly when those interview processes would be. And, like the week of such and such, not just kind of down to certain weeks that will be ready to do interviews for each of those processes. So, like Andy said, we have a meeting tomorrow afternoon to kind of get specific dates on the calendar, but we have a pretty rough schedule timeline that Bricker helped us put together for those processes.
Oh, how's it structured given that it was passed for both Stevenson and the athletic complex when it comes to an architect and a CMR in particular, those 2 pieces of it? Are they done as one unit or separate, or is
Great
there an
question.
option?
So typically what happens, so all of that is part of the RFQ, RFP. And what will happen is when we go to interview construction managers or architectural firms, because that was your example. To give you an example, last time when we did this, 2 of the architectural firms as a sub contractor, the architectural firm as a subcontractor for the head just stayed and was part of the next presentation.
So it was like the
So,
same
like, they,
engineer
like,
that
combine-
teams up
yeah,
with
they
both
partner.
architectural
That's right.
firms.
So
yeah.
like Corda just stayed for all 3, which was,
So-
and then, so what could happen is, and this isn't my world, but I'm just making up, Athletics Plus, I'm making this up, by the way, it's not a real firm. But, let's say, Moody Nolan, again, I'm making this stuff up, Moody Nolan and Perkins Will decide that they want to, interview for this job. Moody, and separately, Moody Nolan could use Athletics Plus as part of their interview. And then Perkins Will comes in next, they could use Athletics Plus. And I've seen that happen, and so it wouldn't surprise me if one or some or all propose that as part of their presentation.
Right, because I feel, we know through our master planning processes that, the middle school, high school project, they were similar. Stevenson and athletic, there are people whose niche area is doing athletic complexes. Like
Yes.
that is
Yes.
kind of a different animal.
Yeah, and that will all be all part of the process, and I think help us make a determination who's the best fit. So,
Okay, well, that's exciting. And Beth, I'm sorry too, the things that are laid out in law, the RFQ, RFP process, what are the requirements for selection? I know that the owner's rep, there really are none, because that's not required, but is it lowest and best, meaning basically whatever he thinks the best, but like, they don't require you to take, the lowest bid necessarily?
Right, and even to that point, so the architect, the design professional process, what you do first is ask for an RFQ, and that is, there's no
Just
dollars.
qualifications,
So it's
yeah.
just qualifications. What jobs have you done? What's your experience? What makes you the best firm to do our project? They submit a proposal, and we look at all those proposals and narrow it down and interview let's say 3. And then we eventually select one of them, and then we ask them, the process in the law is then you ask them for a cost proposal. So you're not seeing comparable cost proposals from multiple design professionals. So the process is, if you can't come to an agreement then in terms of cost with the design professional you choose, then you can choose to go to your second choice in terms of design professional. So, yeah, so it is not lowest, or even lowest and best,
You're
quite
okay,
frankly.
yeah, so it's maybe a little bit different than what we'd be used to, like doing a home project.
Right, where you get
Not
several.
as- yeah, you get the
get
bids
several-
and it's a
right.
whole-
Now, I will say, just based on talking to the construction attorneys at Bricker, there is a pretty standard range for architects on a project, a pretty standard percentage that, maybe it varies 1% or maybe 2, but, in this industry, I think Eric could probably talk about this all night, but, so it's not, crazy different, unexpected numbers that you're gonna get. We pretty much know what percentage to expect, for the cost proposal for an architect.
But also, I mean, we pass the levy publicly, they know,
Yeah.
they know what we're working with,
Right,
so.
right, so.
When we put it out to the dispatch and other publications, can we also request quotes? Like, if we're
Reach out
happy
to
with-
people?
If we're happy with
Yes,
what we got here. can we-
yes, we can send that to as many companies, so if there's companies we've worked with in the past
Yeah.
that we know that are interested and we wanna make sure that they see that, then, yeah, and we will do that. We
Good.
will, or architects that have already reached out to us that, say they're interested, we'll make sure that they know about, the notice for the RFQ process, yeah.
So I think, really good time, building on the conversation. I know we all have, I have no concerns about ethical values and, we have high standards. And I think our staff, I have, great faith in them as well. But I also will say, an unusual thing when we have tens of millions of dollars that will be spent on one firm and not another firm, that, there is a lot of money in the air. And there are ethical rules around, things like what you can accept, what's, okay for a vendor to have in terms of communication, or, some things that might trip up somebody on staff, for instance, who hadn't been through the process before in particular, like, hey, I'll take you out to lunch. So, I would ask if, we could just distribute that, as a reminder, maybe even, it's not just, send out an email, but, think about ways of making sure that any staff who has any role whatsoever in looking at proposals and dealing with vendors, and maybe, just so we have it too as a board, it's just always a good reminder to have to keep out of trouble.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's a great point, Eric, yeah.
Good idea. Okay, any other discussion about this? Okay, so we've had our motion and second, so Beth, can you please call the roll?
Mr. Bodie?
Aye?
Mrs. Gephardt?
Aye.
Mr. Gousset?
Aye.
Mrs. Matney?
Aye.
Ms. Wassman?
Aye.
Great. Under personnel, we have 1 through 13. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Any second?
I'm sorry.
I'll second.
Is there questions?
I think it was the later thing I had a question on. No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so if there's no discussion to be had, Beth, can you please call the roll?
Mr. Bodie?
Aye.
Mrs. Gephardt?
Aye.
Mr. Gousset?
Aye.
Mrs. Matney?
Aye.
Ms. Wassman?
Aye.
All right, is there a policy committee report?
We did meet, and we have a first read on the agenda for several policies. Nothing sticks out in terms of like something that I would need to update you with, other than reading the policies.
Mainly just like language change, a shall instead of a will, that type of
Almost
stuff.
exclusively.
Okay.
There was one guidance proposal. that I think Chris Dice is working on, right? Isn't there one guidance proposal?
Oh, I think it's around AI.
Yeah. I think I have it with.
Yeah, and it's more, well, exactly what Kevin just said.
Yeah.
A guidance proposal, yeah, not policy.
Oh, guide's proposal?
Acceptable use in internet safety.
Yeah, that's the policy. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
What's
So
the letter,
EDC?
Kevin? Say that again,
B
Chris?
on, are you referring to, Kevin, are you referring to, under first reading,
Yeah,
1B, EDEC?
yeah, EDEC.
Yeah, the artificial intelligence EDEC was, actually, that was passed on to us from the group that passes on the recommended policies.
The OSBA
And
stuff.
that, yeah, that's really
Stars, it's right there.
aligns to the recently approved Senate Bill 29 language, which requires us to have that language.
Yeah, which is about student, like, gaining access to student data,
Privacy,
right?
it's like
Correct.
Privacy.
data
Yeah.
privacy.
That's what that policy is around. But we do have an upcoming, and I'll talk about that next month.
Yeah.
Our AI guidance document.
Let me make sure I have this correct. EDEC is about AI, and you're saying that relates to Senate Bill 29? Because that's how I understood you to say that, and I'm like, that's,
No,
okay.
you, correct.
I didn't, I'm like, I don't think those two are together. Not saying they won't be together.
It is in EDE. The language is in EDE,
Okay.
which is
L.
L,
That's,
which is L.
that's Senate Bill 29, if you will.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, the other one is E EDEA.
I swear to goodness, I heard you all say the letters, and I'm like,
No,
one more time.
We're playing alphabet soup here.
Yeah.
ED and EB are not my
There.
friends. No, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I know, I try. I'm
Yeah,
trying
but
to catch
honestly,
up.
it's mostly just going through language
Mhm.
changes
That's, usually it is.
and documentation, yeah.
But I
It is
hadn't had a chance to look over them yet.
Just a first reading today, so there's nothing to vote on. Any other questions or? Thank you,
So
Paz.
number 2, under that first reading, is a policy called post-issuance compliance, and that is a requirement for issuing bonds as well. And so that is a policy that Bricker Graydon provided to us and said that we need to do a first read and then an approval on, and that is something that will be required to be in place before we issue the bonds.
So, but we'll vote on that at our December meeting.
Right.
And there won't have been, we just approved the resolution to start issuing the notes for the bonds. And in December, in theory, we could be hiring people.
We won't be hiring in December.
Okay.
We'll be, in some interviews.
Okay.
So there likely won't be any selections by the time the December,
Maybe January.
maybe
Okay.
close.
No, I was just curious.
There
as-
definitely will be, the interviewing process will be,
Okay.
it'll kind of depend on.
I got you.
on how that goes.
No, I just wanted to make sure that it's like, if we issued the notes for this and then we have this, that we're not,
Getting the cart before the horse.
no, opposite, that the horse hasn't run away from us yet, in terms of like, if we need to do a post-insurance compliance, do we need to have a first read? And then, like, should we have a special board meeting to do a second read? That's what
No,
I'm asking.
we don't, yeah.
I don't wanna hold you up.
So the post-issuance compliance is for the bonds, not the bond anticipation note.
Thank you.
So the bond anticipation note is just kind of a short temporary loan before you actually issue the bonds and get the full amount of money. And we'll just turn around and pay that off with the bonds,
Yeah.
6 months later. So this is about some of the issuance compliance requirements of the SEC and filing requirements and disclosure requirements when you have an outstanding bond issue. When bondholders are holding our bonds, there are things that we have to comply with and things that we have to disclose on an annual basis. And so anyway, that policy talks about
Right.
that and more.
Better minds than mine are at this. I just wanna make sure that we're not holding anybody back, cause
No.
and that was one of the things that did blow my mind, is this is quick. So, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Okay, is there a teaching and learning committee report?
We did meet.
Yep.
Most of what we talked about was the upcoming AI presentation that Chris will make in a month. We talked about some pathway stuff that Andy talked about in his superintendent's report as well. That's about it.
Great, okay. Now, co-curricular activities and extracurricular activities recommendations, we have a 1 through 6. Is there a second?
Second.
Great, any conversation about that, any
I have
discussion?
a question. If you would have asked me, I would have said that overnight trips from clubs and sports teams typically are up to the families. So I was a little, I knew about the state meet for swimming and diving. I think that's one that I remember from before. But seeing, I think there are 4 events here, 2 from Model UN and 2 from the swim and dive team, where it looked like it wasn't just the transportation, but also airfare and lodging and meals that the school district is paying for. Just surprised me, and wanted to know if there was some special circumstances around this, or is that something that I'm just not realizing?
That's a good question.
It does say funded by district and what's it, MU?
MUN.
So, I guess, you know, there's the OMUN, is not unlike First Robotics, in terms of, the district paying a good portion of the costs associated with registration, sometimes travel, et cetera. Oftentimes, whether it's dive, swim, OMUN, or First Robotics, there's a component of fundraising that goes in to offset the cost, almost always. I don't know the ratio off the top of my head.
So the Model UN, so when we say provided by the district, so it's provided through their activity fund, and they have done a couple fundraisers. The Bobcat Boosters, I think, has committed $8,000 to them. So when we say provided through, the school district has contributed some money towards that trip in last year, and plan to do that same thing this year. So we asked them to make an effort to do some fundraising and to seek out some funding. So the cost is going to be paid through that activity fund, which is Bobcat Booster money, which is fundraising. They had a soup fundraiser. They raised a couple $1,000s. And then we have generally transferred money into those activity funds in lieu of charging them fees. So now travel, I know, is a little bit different, but anyway, it's a combination of funds that go through their activity fund for Model UN, I can tell you. First Robotics is the same. Last year, so some of the competitions, they did some fundraising. They did several fundraising projects, and then the school did transfer some funds into their activity fund to pay for their competitions, which included some travel expenses, registration fees, meals, those sorts of things. The swimming, so like you mentioned, the like state championship meet, of course, the school, you know, any OHSAA tournament level, no matter if it's, you know, sectional, district, regional, state, the school covers that. In fact, we get money back from OHSAA for participation in that. So those are always covered. The athletic department also has historically covered 2 of the fees for 2 outside swim meets other than the state tournament. I think those are the same 2 that they do each year, and that's an athletic department kind of decision. So.
And with the Model UN, like under appropriations earlier in the agenda, we had the Model UN was $10,000. Would that be?
Yeah, so that is just increasing their budget to allow them to spend some money for funds that they have raised. So they did, you know, the fundraiser. They have a commitment from Bobcat Boosters, I think, for another
So that
$8,000,
comes in.
and so that is just allowing them to
Gotcha.
spend that money because some of those registration fees have to be paid now, maybe before all that fundraising has come
Comes
in.
through. Got it.
So, I guess, one lens definitely that I would think about this through is the equity across the board, right? So I'm thinking about like choir, or theater, or for that matter, the language clubs. And again, you know, if there are events to go to, kind of what would be the expectation around who pays what on those? And, you know, wanting to have sort of a consistent approach. I mean, I get, for the swim one makes more sense to me, because I know that's just how it works. Like, you know, you have these meets, and because of, you know, the number of events and all that, and how they fit that in the day and everything, you know, it's harder to do, my understanding. You know, it's more like to compete, you need to go to these events, just like different than, say, the football team, which drives to the football game and drives home, right? And they don't need to stay overnight. And there are lots of opportunities to play football where you don't have to do that. I mean, I don't know, maybe there are swim meets that are local and they choose to go to ones further away. You know, again, I don't really know about that. I mean, the Model UN, when you're flying to two different cities and saying the school district is paying for that, strikes me as odd. I mean, I love the Model UN. I did Model UN, and I loved it. And in fact, I remember fondly my trip to New York City as a senior, doing that. This is not trying to pick on anybody, but it struck me as like, is that a place that we're consistent? Like, again, I recall a kid in choir going, there was a trip to New York City, and I don't remember, I thought that was all on us as parents, that we put the money in, but I could be wrong. I mean, maybe some of it was booster, I don't recall that being, like, transportation being funded by the school, or maybe that's different now.
They went to New York last year, didn't they?
I know they travel, like to New York, for example, the Grandview Singers.
Yeah.
But is it for a
And it's-
competition, or is it just for, I mean, I know, it's like, and this is exactly what you're getting at,
Yeah,
is
it's
like
a
sort of how do you?
And I don't know if any, so that, I don't think any of the trip costs run through the school on that. But I don't know if the Boosters does any fundraising too, like the Model UN does fundraising that, so like the Model UN's trip, even though we say it's to the school, it's a lot of fundraising money.
I get what you're saying, though, because it is sort of like, and I don't know, because I don't know Model U, and I, again, like you said, don't want to pick on them, but like, are these like opt-in competitions, or is this standard for Model UN? And likewise, for any other club, like, is there an incentive to seek out travel that gets paid for by the school for great experiences, don't get me wrong, but like, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, because I kind of see where you're coming from, is like, is there an overall evaluation for what is and is not something that the school is in for?
But we also don't have pay to play for sports, so it's like,
Right, no, and I don't, Model UN is being used as an example because it's here right now, but the same can be said for swimming, like Eric said, is there swimming, like, is this what you have to do because this is the OA, blah, blah, whatever. you know.
OHSSA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
the
yeah, I mean, I do-
sports, like, again, my experience personally was more from soccer, but there were events typically before the start of the season that were, you go and it's an overnight thing, it's
Yes.
kind of fun and all that.
Yeah.
I recall those being totally on the parents. As opposed to the games where transportation was provided, but there was no overnight thing. You know, and we didn't have, even though we have a really good soccer team, like, we didn't send them to Florida to compete in a tournament. So, again, I'm just thinking about consistency here and what our approach is.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I interrupted
so-
you, you're about to say something.
Well, no, I hear what you're saying. I think, you know, OMUN, if you want to compete nationally, you're going to have to fly the team to where the competition is. And it's typically a 3 to 5 day competition. And that's gonna require overnight stays. It's typically in cities like New York or LA or New Orleans, Chicago.
Boston's here. too.
Boston. And, you know, I think that there is if you want to have that academic team, and you want them to compete nationally, which is basically how they compete, I think it's important for them to have, you know, skin in the game in terms of each person who's participating is involved in a fundraiser, and so too are their parents, et cetera. But the likelihood of them being able to be independent and all of the participants to afford, you know, flights, hotels, et cetera, you know, I think bringing it back to a board decision around how we allocate resources. I would say the same about FIRST. You know, FIRST and OMUN are going to be more expensive to have that academic team relative to many other things due to travel and overnight stays.
So that's different too, because we're talking academic team versus club.
Right.
Like a club being almost like, you know, we have a shared interest and we do things for fun. This is a team.
This is a school.
Well, that's how I think of it, about
Right.
it.
Well, because I'm like thinking to myself, like for instance, the ski club. Very expensive for families, like not, you know, and families pay the whole amount because it's a club and you're doing it for, they're not doing competitions. They're going to have fun. But
Yeah, so I
parents are
think-
100% paying the
So I
cost of
think
that
of,
except for
I think
maybe
of,
the
I think, so just for
advisors.
example, Lego League, Science Olympiad, Power of the Pen, First Robotics, OMUN, I think of as academic school-sponsored teams. I would not say ski club is a, you know, academic.
It's a
school.
club,
Yeah, it's a
yeah.
club, separate from, you know, and so I think it was a big commitment by the board, the school district, because this is relatively new. And, you know, one of the things that, if you recall, the Education Foundation gave us seed money to support that, to get it started, kind of with the understanding that the district would, you know, be on the hook for some larger costs in order, you know, because we believed in this opportunity for our students.
I do have, a little bit to your point. We also, like, we as a board, if we don't think it's fair and equitable, we vote it down. Like, I mean, we could say, no, thank you. Have a nice life. Respectfully, politely, Bobcat way, whatever. Also, I do think, as, not that I'm through parenting by any means, I paid a kindergarten fee for my child to go to full-day kindergarten fee. We don't do that anymore. So have things changed, you know, the foundation gave the district money to start this, and now we're continuing it. Is this a subtle, maybe not so subtle shift in just our approach? So it's like, I don't know if it's any one thing that has happened, or maybe it's just, you and I've been doing this we're at year 7 now. So it's like, because I'm like, I feel like Model UN has been on here for a while, but I don't have your financial mind to be like, oh, we paid, or we didn't pay, or we whatever. But I,
You know, this is getting off a little bit, but, you know, I mean, I love that we provide this, and I think we've done some really good work around making sure that, you know, we kind of have a comprehensive program for all kids, and, which I really like. Again, it bothers me somewhat that it seems like, you know, we're kind of subsidizing some and not others. And I'm not sure that's because, and maybe like Andy, you thought about that. You've gone, looked at everything and said yes to this and no to this. I don't think we as a board have like thought about that and said, yeah, you know, this makes sense to us, that this is where we draw the line. There's a model in my head. Ohio State has started a program that they've had for a few years around, they're really trying to focus on the second year, so it's called the STEP program. And essentially, it provides students with a certain amount of funding to do something. And it's really up to them. You know, sometimes it could be a study abroad, it could be a research opportunity, it could be some volunteer activity, whatever. And I like that. And, you know, the model there would be thinking about, we're subsidizing something for, you know, each of our students. And they get to choose. Like, if the most important thing for them is to do a trip to, you know, Costa Rica because they are passionate about Spanish, then that is their priority. If somebody else says, you know, I really love the idea of Model UN and I want to go to Boston, I can do that. If some, you know, sort of that, as opposed to doing something and it ends up, you know, somebody ends up participating in 5 different things that get this big subsidy and somebody else doesn't participate
Yeah,
in
so,
them and doesn't get
yeah,
anything.
I mean, I think it's a great conversation. A couple thoughts. One, I do see, you know, the Costa Rica trip or the trip to Italy or the trip to Spain as different than a school-sponsored academic team. So that's just me. You know, in terms of this idea of equity, you know, if a student here plays three sports and another kid doesn't, well, the kid that plays 3 sports is getting more taxpayer dollars than the one that doesn't. If a kid here takes, you know, 9 AP classes and 6 college credit plus courses, and we are paying full freight for all of that, and another kid doesn't, well, that's not fair or equitable from a financial standpoint either.
point,
So,
yeah.
I mean, I think that if you're going to make a governance decision that you're gonna waive fees, I think it would be it's gonna be really difficult to gauge, you know, fairness and equity. You know, a different way, I mean, by the way, I've had a son playing football. I've had a son not play football and cross country. I can tell you the cost and experience of football is in a different stratosphere, not a different world, than cross country in terms of what it costs, in terms of equipment, helmets, gear. And so, you know, is that fair or equitable? I do think just from my perspective, what is I think challenging is in particular these what I would describe as high-level national academic teams that are competing nationally. First, robotics and OMU have come to mind. I mean, Science Olympiad, not so much here, but in my previous life in another district, competed more nationally. I think it's really important. I mean, really critically important for those students to participate, to be given that opportunity for so many reasons, not only in terms of their confidence, but also being a part of a team, something bigger than themselves, the experience of traveling and competing against other teams, the network and people that you meet from other districts across the nation. Not only that, just the skills you develop and learn in OMU and in FIRST Robotics are lifelong and really are developed in ways that, while, you know, would love to say, you know, every class, you know, can replicate. I'm not sure they can. But there's a real cost to it, I think. That is, I mean, disproportionate from what, you know, others. I mean, now, you start getting into, say, football, for example. I mean, you know, a helmet these days is it's not cheap. You know, so I guess you could extrapolate this, and but I also think, I've been talking too long about this, but, you know, I also believe, and I think this board does, in, like, we board approve international travel, and our quote-unquote school-sponsored trips to, say, Costa Rica, or to Italy, or to France, and there's others. I can say to you that more than 50% of boards don't do that. They would not approve that trip.
Like you
That
mean-
isn't to say that students might not have the opportunity,
That's what I was just gonna ask.
but it's going to be run through a private organization, and it isn't going to be board approved.
Just because it doesn't need
Well,
board
board
approval,
approved
no, yeah.
financially, is that what you're saying?
No, we're not
Oh,
paying
right.
for those
Oh.
trips. This
Right,
district-
okay.
But even the liability umbrella.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I think one other thing, just, because I've been thinking about this interestingly. You know, one of the other things I think about, and I don't have it all figured out, by the way. I've given it a lot of thought, but I'm not sure that where the right answer is. But this idea of, is it a school-sponsored activity where there is an identified supplemental in our contract? Which to me really affirms that this is a school-sponsored academic team. Versus, there isn't, and we're just doing this. Like, you know, again, I don't wanna name, but like, let's just, say, you know, there's a 8th grade English teacher that wants to take 10 kids to, I don't know, somebody's
To
whole,
go to
some
Anne Frank's
famous
house, 'cause
Anne
I know
Frank's
they're
house.
reading that
Yeah,
right now.
there you go, perfect, perfect. And, you know, so, and there are 10 students in 8th grade whose parents and kids are all in. Well, okay, while I think that's a wonderful thing, and what a great opportunity, I would not think that would be something that we, as a governor's team, would pay for. And part of my thinking there is there's no supplemental, and also, is it universal? And so what I mean by that is, the entire OMUN team is going. They're working towards a goal. They're preparing exhaustively for a goal. I see that as different than like a one-off, self-directed opportunity that a select few can do.
So we haven't had a board retreat in a bit, and so probably come the turn of the new year, we'll be talking about, it could be something that we might want to discuss in a deeper sense at a board retreat, because it could, this conversation can be big, because then what's coming to my mind too are things like 5th and 6th grade camp, the Washington DC trip. These are things that families fund, but it's for the whole grade, you know. So there's a whole depth of things. So maybe it's something we could think about and talk about more fully.
We've had a fair amount of work time and work sessions. We've just been busy doing something else.
Well, I know there was a lot going on here recently, but it's been a little bit since we've had.
Is this something that we might talk about in finance too? Like, and I don't know if this is an imposition to pull, like, what is everything that's a student, how do I wanna phrase this? Funded by the district student activity. Is that an easy thing to pull and just look at the list?
Yeah, I think that's a topic we could definitely talk about as a finance committee.
And then report back?
Can I propose, though, I think there's still a lack of clarity around, like, the structure of how decisions are made and how trips and events are categorized. So, because there's another component when you talk about athletics, helmets, that's paid for by boosters. But not every sport has a strong booster that would be able to provide financial support. So I think that's inequitable, and worth a discussion. So before we get into actual dollars, I would like to understand what that like layout looks like, just so we are on the same page when it comes to looking at certain projects. Because I think you bring a really great point. I didn't look at it as critically as you did, but I'm glad you asked the questions that you did. And when you think equitable, it's, well, I think Title IX. Do both types of sports have the same opportunities to travel? do we keep a running list of who we've approved and how much we've spent? And I don't think we look at the other groups and say, we have all this money to spend, what do you wanna do? But it makes for more mindful decision-making so that we can easily defend the decisions of why we've made versus they show up in our packet and we approve them, and then I don't have a running intentional list of who I've approved and why. And it helps defend the financial consequences of that as well. So I think I would like to be educated and know the layout before I add dollars to it and where those monies come from.
Right, there's multiple revenue sources. It's like one
Right.
thing to talk about district, but like, who else, what is the boosters, like Bobcat boosters paying for? What are the sports-specific boosters paying for? What are
Right.
fundraisers paying for? It's,
You were not on the board, and I can't remember if Mr. Gousset and Ms. Gephardt were on the board, because we did, all the boosters came and presented. It was a little tedious, informative, don't get me wrong, but it was every single group that had some kind of affiliation. Is it 501? What's the number?
C3.
C3.
That's the
And
nonprofit,
they
official
came and
nonprofit.
presented, and that's where, and I don't like the word defend, I'm like, we voted it up, voted it down. We're elected to do that, so that's our due diligence as board, but it's, with that process, I think we're a little bit more familiar than you all had the experience with going through, like, this is, Bobcat Boosters came in and they're like, these are our bylaws, this is what we do, these are the things we support, this is this, this, and this.
We were here for that.
Were you guys here for, I couldn't remember when it was,
Our very first one.
oh, welcome
Our
to the
very
board.
first year.
Right, but that was
Brad-
one,
Brad and I have worked
Yeah.
together pretty closely the last few years, on kind of streamlining a structure of what gets provided and
Right.
what, and by who.
right,
And so we have that documented on athletics. But yeah, let me put together some information. We can talk about it at finance committee meeting and then share it with the board.
to both of your
Yeah.
points, it is something we do definitely need to get into too.
Yeah.
Like, I don't mean to come across like, no, we're fine. I absolutely do think we get this, and we all know where I'm at in supporting students in finances. We already know I'm on board.
Well, but like, we still have some sports that don't have a booster.
Right, right. They
And
don't have their own
that's
specific
inequitable,
booster, right.
in my
Right.
opinion.
And it does
So-
seem like fundraising is probably different across, but like, we all know, like, I know every year that swim is going to sell mums. I know every year that the band is gonna do decal, you know, there are some that you're just like, yep, I count on it, that's, you know, that fundraiser. Not every group has like their set fundraiser that we know to expect and,
Right.
uh,
Well, and not to mention, and this is a bigger conversation, but like the amount of asks that go to local businesses to
Right,
support everybody's
right.
silent auction. So, not that we're the people to organize that, but I do think we play a role in making sure that every sport has an opportunity to participate in whatever, you know, event they want to be able to do.
Right.
So,
Well, I guess the part that sticks out to me is, you know, like, partly I couldn't, I'm not sure I could articulate some of the differences that at least are in your mind of like, well, here's something that's in one category and here's something that's in another category. So I think there are some expectations of, you know, some groups that, you know, need to fundraise, need to do it, need to pay themselves, even just to go to something local. It really strikes me the out-of-state things,
Yeah.
especially when there's multiple out-of-state trips.
Yeah.
yeah.
And again, my experience was like literally 40 years ago, you know, where like Model UN, we had a local Model UN for Central Ohio. And then like every other year, you know, we had a trip somewhere else. So I don't know, yeah, to Chicago.
That's exciting.
So I don't, like, maybe there's not that
Right.
in Ohio for
Right.
a Model UN competition.
Right.
I don't know. I honestly just don't know. But anyway, what really struck me was the multiple overnights from
Yep.
two different
Well,
groups.
but it could be helpful too, if there's a process in place to get to those that shows and reflects that the students have skin in the game, they've approached these, you know what I mean, like questions that we would ask to you know, cause then to your point, like how much money is coming out of this big budget
right.
to go to Model UN?
That's right.
And if it's $30,000 and swim gets 10, like, is that equitable in terms of the level of competition that they're going for?
Band goes, I don't know.
Well,
band
band's going to
camp.
Florida for spring break, right? So, how, I mean,
But
is that
I
all
think-
covered
I
by
think they're
parents?
They're
paying for it.
fundraising.
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah.
a combination.
So,
Is the
and so then
distance
it's
there.
like, okay, it's a combination of
Fundraising, I
parents,
know.
it's fundraising, it's,
And my sense is that that's like 5 or 10.
I have no idea. I just
think
know
it's
that
like
it was
5
another example.
5 band members. I don't think it's the entire.
And it's like another, I don't know what their situation is, like, Kevin and my daughter, who both do dance together, and they're going to Florida for dance. They're going for fun primarily, you know,
Right.
like, it's
Right,
not,
right.
it's not really like a competition. They go and they perform, and it's I don't know what the band situation is, if it's something similar where you're going and you're performing at Disney Springs, you know, as opposed
Right,
to it being
or like the
a-
Thanksgiving Day Parade or something. It's just an example, but I would love to learn more about what that looks like and to make sure it's all streamlined and that everybody gets fair access and, you know,
Right.
and what else could be out there to provide additional opportunities, like, for the reasons that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. It's a big universe, I mean, like, of things to explore
Yeah.
here under this umbrella.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the whole, like, I don't really like the idea of like giving, like, it's kind of like a activities equivalent of the backpack bill, like, you each get $5,000 and you
Right.
spend it how you want, like,
Yeah.
that doesn't quite make sense, but like, you know, there's making
Yeah.
sure it's equitable access for everybody.
Yeah, for sure.
With that said, can we vote on these? We have a
I already
motion and
motioned,
a
I gotta
second.
vote on it.
Can we vote on this, and then I guess that the directive is that finance committee is gonna start talking about it, and then we'll go from there. Be an iterative process. Okay, then Beth, please call the roll.
Mr. Bodie?
Aye.
Mrs. Gephardt?
Aye.
Mr. Gusset?
Aye.
Mrs. Matney?
Aye.
Ms. Wassman?
Aye.
Okay, any other business anyone needs to raise? Okay, there's no executive session, so is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Need a second?
Second.
There you go.
Okay, Beth,
There you
please
go,
call the
buddy.
roll.
Mr. Bodie?
Aye.
Mrs. Gephardt?
Aye.
Mr. Gusset?
Aye.
Mrs. Matney?
Aye.
Ms. Wassman?
Aye. All right.